Lord, I'm told that Mr. Brudno of the American delegation will present the case against Rosenberg.
May it please the tribunal. In connection with the case against the defendant Rosenberg, I wish to offer the document book designated as U.S. Exhibit EE. This book contains English translations of all the documents which I will offer into evidence at this time, as well as English translations of those documents previously offered, to which I will refer. The documents are arranged by series in the order C, L, R, PS, and EC, and they are arranged numerically within each series. Your honors will note that on the first 4 pages of the document book, there appears a descriptive list of documents. This list is a tabulation of all the documents directly implicating Rosenberg, including those previously offered and those which I will offer into evidence. Those previously offered are keyed to the transcript page of the record, as well as to their exhibit numbers. The list is included in the document books.
A little bit slower.
Certainly, sir. The list is included in the document books made available to the defense. This list will gather together in one place all references to the defendant Rosenberg which are in the record up to this point. In order to avoid repetition, I will not refer to a great many of these documents which have previously been introduced. The indictment at page 29 charges the defendant Rosenberg under all 4 counts of the indictment. In the presentation which follows, I will show that as charged in count 1, main section Roman numeral 4, subparagraph capital D, Rosenberg played a particularly prominent role in developing and promoting the doctrinal techniques of the conspiracy, in developing and promoting beliefs and practices incompatible with Christian teaching, in subverting the influence of the churches over the German people, in pursuing the program of relentless persecution of the Jews, and in reshaping the educational system in order to make the German people amenable to the will of the conspirators and to prepare them psychologically for the waging of aggressive war. I will also show that Rosenberg played an important role in preparing Germany for the waging of aggressive war through the direction of foreign trade, as charged in count 1, subparagraph capital E, page 6 of the indictment, and that his activities in the field of foreign policy contributed materially to the preparation for the aggressions charged in subparagraph capital F, pages 7 to 10 of the indictment, and the crimes against peace, which are charged in count 2. And finally, I will show that Rosenberg participated in the planning and direction of the war crimes and the crimes against humanity as specified in paragraph G, page 10 of count 1 of the indictment. Particularly, he participated in the planning and the direction of the spoliation of art treasures in Western countries and the numerous crimes committed in that part of the Eastern countries formerly occupied by the USSR. The political career of the defendant Rosenberg embraced the entire history of National Socialism, and it permeated nearly every phase of the conspiracy with which we are here concerned. In order to obtain a full conception of his influence upon and participation in the conspiracy, it is necessary to review briefly his political history and to consider each of his political activities in their relation to the thread of the conspiracy, which stretches from the inception of the party in 1919 to the defeat of Germany in 1945. It is both interesting and revealing to note that for Rosenberg, the 30th of November, 1918, marked the beginning of political activities with a lecture about the Jewish problem. That statement is found at line 2 of the translation of document 2886 PS, which document is an excerpt from a book entitled The Work of Alfred Rosenberg, a Bibliography. I offer this book as U.S. Exhibit 591. From document 3557 PS, which is excerpts from an official pamphlet entitled Dates in the History of the NSDAP, which I offer as USA Exhibit 592, we learn that Rosenberg was a member of the German Labor Party, afterwards the National Socialist German Workers' Party, in January 1919, and that Hitler joined forces with Rosenberg and his colleagues in October of the same year. Thus, Rosenberg was a member of the National Socialist movement even before Hitler himself. I now wish to offer document 3530 PS, which is an extract from Das Deutsche Führerlexikon, the year 1934-35. I offer it as USA Exhibit 593. From this document, we obtain additional biographical data on Rosenberg as follows. From 1921 until the present, that is, until 1935, the date of this publication, he was editor of the Völkische Beobachter. He was editor of the NS Monatshefte in 1930. In 1930, he became a member of the Reichstag and representative of the foreign policy of the movement. Since April 1933, he was the leader of the Foreign Political Office of the NSDAP and was then designated as Reichsleiter. In January 1934, he was deputized by the Führer for the spiritual and philosophical education of the NSDAP, the German Labor Front, and all related organizations. Document 2886, which I have just referred to and offered as USA Exhibit 591, adds that in July 1941, Rosenberg was appointed Reichsminister for the occupied Eastern Territories. With this general background information in mind, the first phase of proof will deal with Rosenberg as official National Socialist ideologist. The proof which I will present will show the nature and scope of the ideological tenets he expounded and the influence he exerted upon the unification of German thought, a unification which was an essential part of the conspirators' program for the seizure of power and for preparation for aggressive war. Rosenberg wrote extensively and actively participated in virtually every aspect of the National Socialist program. His first publication was The Nature, Basic Principles, and Aims of the NSDAP. This publication appeared in 1922. Rosenberg spoke of this book in a speech which we have seen and heard delivered in the motion picture previously introduced as USA Exhibit 167. On page 2, part 1 of the transcription of the speech, which is our document 3054 PS, Rosenberg stated as follows, I quote, "During this time, that is, during the early phase of the party..."
Would you go a little bit slower?
I'm sorry, sir. "During this time, a short thesis was written, which nevertheless is significant in the history of the NSDAP." This is Rosenberg speaking. "It was always being asked what points of program the NSDAP had and how they each were to be interpreted. Therefore, I wrote the principal program and aims of the NSDAP, and this writing made the first permanent connection between Munich and local organizations being organized and friends within the Reich." End of quote. We thus see that the original draftsman of and spokesman on the party program was the defendant Rosenberg. Without attempting to survey the entire ideological program advanced by the defendant Rosenberg in his various writings and speeches, which are very numerous, I wish to offer into evidence certain of his statements as indication of the nature and the broad scope of the ideological program which he championed. It will be seen that there was not a single basic tenet of the Nazi philosophy which was not given authoritative expression by Rosenberg. Rosenberg wrote the book entitled Myth of the 20th Century, which was published in 1930. This book has already been offered as USA Exhibit 352. At page 479, which your honors will find on the second page of document 3553 PS.
355.
3553, your honor.
Yes.
Rosenberg wrote on the race question as follows: "The essence of the contemporary world revolution lies in the awakening of the racial types, not in Europe alone, but on the whole planet. This awakening is the organic counter-movement against the last chaotic remnants of the liberal economic imperialism, whose object of exploitation out of desperation has fallen into the snare of Bolshevik Marxism in order to complete what democracy had begun, the extirpation of the racial and national consciousness." End of quote. Rosenberg expounded the Lebensraum idea, which idea was the chief motivation, the dynamic impulse behind Germany's waging of aggressive war. In his journal, the National Socialist Manifesto, for May 1932, which I wish to offer as USA Exhibit 594, our document number 2777 PS, he wrote at page 199, "The understanding that the German nation, if it is not to perish in the truest sense of the word, needs ground and soil for itself and its future generations. And the second sober perception, that this soil can no more be conquered in Africa, but in Europe, and first of all, in the East. These organically determine the German foreign policy for centuries. End of quote. Rosenberg expressed his theory as to the place of religion in the National Socialist state in his Myth of the 20th Century, additional excerpts from which are cited in document 2891 PS. At page 215 of the Myth, he wrote as follows: "We now realize that the central supreme values of the Roman and the Protestant churches, being a negative Christianity, do not respond to our soul, that they hinder the organic powers of the peoples determined by their Nordic race, that they must give way to them, and that they will have to be remodeled to conform to a Germanic Christendom. Therein lies the meaning of the present religious search." Your Honors, please, when the court rose, I had just read a quotation of Rosenberg in which he expressed his views on Christianity. In the place of traditional Christianity, Rosenberg sought to implant the neo-pagan myth of the blood. At page 114 in the Myth of the 20th Century, he stated as follows: "Today, a new faith is awakening, the myth of the blood. The belief that the divine being of mankind generally is to be defended with the blood. The faith embodied by the fullest realization that the Nordic blood constitutes that mystery which has supplanted and overwhelmed the old sacraments." End of quote. Rosenberg's attitudes on religion were accepted as the only philosophy compatible with National Socialism. In 1940, the defendant Bormann wrote to Rosenberg in document 098 PS, which has been previously introduced as USA Exhibit 350, and I quote, he wrote as follows: "The churches cannot be conquered by a compromise between National Socialism and Christian teaching, but only through a new ideology whose coming you yourself have announced in your writings." Rosenberg actively participated in the program for elimination of church influence. The defendant Bormann frequently wrote Rosenberg in this regard, furnishing him information as to proposed action to be instituted against the churches, and, where necessary, requesting that action be taken by Rosenberg's department. I refer to documents introduced in connection with a case against the Leadership Corps, such documents as 070 PS, USA Exhibit 349, which deals with abolition of religious services in the schools. Document 072 PS, USA 357, dealing with confiscation of religious property. 064 PS, USA 359, which deals with the inadequacy of anti-religious material being circulated to the soldiers. Document 089 PS, USA Exhibit 360, dealing with curtailment of the publication of Protestant periodicals. And document 122 PS, which is USA Exhibit 362, dealing with the closing of theological faculties. Rosenberg was particularly avid in his pursuit of what he called the Jewish question. On the 28th of March, 1941, on the occasion of the opening of the Institute for the Exploration of the Jewish Question, he set the keynote for its activities and indicated the direction which the exploration was to take. I would like to quote from document 2889 PS, which I offer as U.S. Exhibit 595. This is an excerpt from the Völkische Beobachter, 29th of March, 1941. This is a statement made by Rosenberg on the occasion of the opening of the Institute. For Germany, the Jewish question is only then solved when the last Jew has left the greater German space. Since Germany, with its blood and its nationalism, has now broken for always this Jewish dictatorship for all Europe, and has seen to it that Europe as a whole will become free from the Jewish parasitism once more, we may, I believe, also say, for all Europeans. For Europe, the Jewish question is only then solved when the last Jew has left the European continent. End of quote. It has already been seen that Rosenberg did not overlook any opportunity to put these anti-Semitic beliefs into practice. Your honors will recall that in document 001 PS, which was introduced as USA Exhibit 282 in connection with the case on persecution of the Jews, Rosenberg recommended that instead of executing 100 Frenchmen as retaliation for attempts on lives of members of the Wehrmacht, there be executed 100 Jewish bankers, lawyers, etc. This recommendation was made with the avowed purpose of awakening the anti-Jewish sentiment. And document 1752 PS, which was introduced this morning by Sir David Maxwell Fyfe as Exhibit GB 159, discloses that Rosenberg had called an anti-Semitic Congress in June 1944, although this Congress was canceled due to military events. In the realm of foreign policy, in addition to demanding Lebensraum, Rosenberg called for elimination of the Versailles Treaty and cast aside any thought of revision of that treaty. In his book, The Nature, Principles, and Aims of the NSDAP, written by Rosenberg in 1922, he expressed his opinions regarding the Treaty of Versailles. Excerpts from this book are translated in document 2433 PS and I offer the book as USA Exhibit 596. He stated as
PS
follows.
number, do you say?
I beg your pardon?
What's the PS number?
2433, Your Honor. He stated as follows. The National Socialists reject the popular phrase of revision of the Peace of Versailles, as such a revision might perhaps bring a few numerical reductions in the so-called obligations. The entire German people would still be, just as before, the slave of other nations. Then he goes on to expound the second point of the party. We demand equality for the German people with other nations. The cancellation of the peace treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain. Rosenberg conceived of the spread of National Socialism throughout the world, and, as will be subsequently shown, took an active part in promoting the infection of other nations with his creed. In the nature, principles, and aims of the NSDAP, he states, but National Socialism still believes that its principles and ideology, though in individually different suitable ways of fight, according to racial national conditions, will be directives far beyond the borders of Germany for the inevitable fights for power in other countries of Europe and America. There, too, a decision of ideas must take place. In the racial nationalistic fight against the ever similar lone capitalistic and Marxist internationalism must be taken up. National Socialism believes that once the great world battle is concluded, after the defeat to the present epoch, there will be a time when the swastika will be woven into the different banners of the Germanic peoples as the Aryan symbol of rejuvenation. This statement was made in 1922. 1922, Your Honor, yes. It is thus seen that the defendant Rosenberg gave authoritative expression to the basic tenets upon which National Socialism was founded, and through the exploitation of which the conspiracy was crystallized in action. Rosenberg's value to the conspiratorial program found official recognition with his appointment in 1934 as the Führer's delegate for the entire spiritual and philosophical education and supervision of the NSDAP. His activities in this capacity were vast and varied. I now offer into evidence the National Socialist Yearbook for the year 1938 as USA Exhibit 597. At page 180 of this book, which is our document number 3531 PS, the functions of Rosenberg's office as the Führer's delegate are described as follows. Quote, the sphere of activity of the Führer's commissioner for all spiritual and ideological instruction and education of the movement, its organizations, including the Strength Through Joy, extends to the detailed execution of all the educational work of the party and of the affiliated bodies. The office set up by Reichsleiter Rosenberg has the task of preparing the ideological educational material, of carrying out the teaching program, and is responsible for the education of those teachers suited to this educational and instructional work. End of quote. As the Führer's delegate, Rosenberg thus supervised all ideological education and training within the party. It was Rosenberg's personal belief that upon the performance of his new functions as ideological delegate depended the future of National Socialism. I offer document 3532 PS as USA Exhibit 598. This is an excerpt from an article by Rosenberg appearing in the March 1934 issue of the Educational Letter. At page 9 of this publication, Rosenberg states, "The focus of all our educational work from now on is the service for this ideology, and it depends on the results of these efforts whether National Socialism will be buried with our fighting ancestors or whether, as we believe, it really represents the beginning of a new era." In his capacity as the Führer's delegate for spiritual and ideological training, Rosenberg assisted in the preparation of the curriculum for the Adolf Hitler schools. These schools, it will be remembered, selected the most suitable candidates from the Hitler Jugend and trained them for leadership within the party. They were the elite schools of National Socialism. I offer into evidence document 3529 PS. I beg your pardon. This document, entitled Documents of German Politics, is already in evidence as USA Exhibit 365. Translations of excerpts from this document are found in 3529 PS. Page 389 reads as follows. As stated by Dr. Lai, Reich's organizations leader, on the 23rd of November, 1937, at Ordensburg, Sonthofen, these Adolf Hitler schools, as the first step of the principle of selecting a special elite, form an important branch in the educational system of the National Socialist training of future leaders. The curriculum has been laid down by Reichsleiter Rosenberg, together with the Reich's organizations leader and the Reich youth leader. End of quote. Rosenberg exercised further influence in the education of party members and the establishment of community schools for all organizations of the party. Document 3528 PS is a translation of page 297 of the 1934 edition of Das Dritte Reich, which I offer as USA Exhibit 599. It reads as follows. We support the request of the Führer's Commission for the supervision of the whole spiritual and ideological training and instruction of the NSDAP, party member Alfred Rosenberg, to organize community schools of all organizations of the NSDAP twice a year, in order to show by this common effort the ideological and political unity of the NSDAP and the steadfastness of the National Socialist will. End of quote. This program was endorsed by the defendant Schirach, as well as by Himmler, Lai, and others.
Mr. Brudno, aren't you dealing with this rather in a cumulative way? Isn't it possible to summarize this evidence against Rosenberg more than you're doing?
I will try to, Your Honor. However, although the indictment charges, and there's already substantial proof to show that the defendant conspirators used ideological training as an implement in achieving their rise to power and in consolidating their control, there seems to be little evidence as to Rosenberg's position. And I am introducing this evidence in order to show that he played a dominant role in this connection. However, I will try to summarize these documents if I can.
Well, I've taken down about 20 documents that you've alluded to this afternoon, all of which deal with Rosenberg's ideological theories.
Yes, Your Honor. I was merely trying to show the scope of his activities, sir.
Yes.
Your Honors will recall that it was in his capacity as Führer's delegate that Rosenberg established the Institute for the Exploration of the Jewish Question in Frankfurt. This institute, commonly known as the Hochschule, has been referred to in connection with the exposition of the plunder of art treasures. Into its library there flowed books, documents, and manuscripts which were looted from virtually every country of occupied Europe. Further evidence on this score will be introduced by the prosecutor for the Republic of France. Your Honors will also recall, and the record shows at pages 1671 to 1687, that it was as ideological delegate that Rosenberg conducted the fabulous art-looting activities of the Einsatzstab Rosenberg, activities which extended to virtually every country occupied by the Germans. I will not attempt to summarize the extent of the plunder and merely refer the tribunal to document 1015 BPS, which has already been introduced as USA Exhibit 385, and to document L188 BS, or L188, which has been introduced as USA Exhibit 386. Document 1015 details the looting of 21,000 objects of art. Document L188, the looting of the contents of over 71,000 Jewish homes in the West. This subject, too, will be further developed by the French prosecutor. The importance of Rosenberg's activities as official ideologist of the Nazi Party was not overlooked. In document 3559 PS, which I wish to introduce as USA Exhibit 600, this document, incidentally, is the heart biography of Rosenberg, entitled The Man and His Work. It is stated that Rosenberg won the German National Prize in 1937. The creation of this prize, Your Honors may recall, was the Nazis' petulant reply to the award of the Nobel Prize to Karlin Ossietzky, an inmate of a German concentration camp. The citation which accompanied the award to Rosenberg read as follows: Alfred Rosenberg has helped with his publications to lay the scientific and intuitive foundation and to strengthen the philosophy of the National Socialist in the most excellent way. The National Socialist movement, and beyond that, the entire German people, will be deeply gratified that the Führer has distinguished Alfred Rosenberg as one of his oldest and most faithful fighting comrades by awarding him the German National Prize. The contribution which Rosenberg's book, The Myth of the 20th Century, which was the foundation of all his ideological propaganda, the contribution which this book has made to the development of National Socialism has been appraised in a publication entitled Bücherkunde. This publication, which bears our document 3554 PS, dated November 1942, I offer as USA Exhibit 601. First page sets forth an appraisal of the myth of the 20th century.
Well, Mr. Brudno, you've referred us to the myth of the 20th century on several occasions.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, we really don't want to hear any more about it.
I'm sorry, sir. I wish to show that this book was regarded as being one of the pillars of the movement. And I wish to show also, sir, that it had a circulation of over 1 million copies.
Well, I think it's absolutely clear from the evidence which has already been given that Rosenberg was enunciating doctrines of the ideology of the Nazi Party. And I don't think that it's necessary to go any further into details about it.
Very well, Your Honor. If the tribunal is satisfied that Rosenberg's ideas did form the foundation for the National Socialist ideological movement, I will pass on.
Well, you've already drawn out.
Yes, Your Honor. All right, sir, I'll pass on to that point. I would merely like to make reference, however, to document 789, which has already been introduced as USA Exhibit 23. This document records a meeting between Hitler and his supreme commanders, on which occasion Hitler said, "The building up of our armed forces was only possible in connection with the ideological education of the German people by the party."
Is that 789 PS?
789, sir, yes. We submit that the contribution which Rosenberg made through formulation and dissemination of National Socialist ideology was fundamental to the conspiracy. As the apostle of neo-paganism, the exponent of the drive for Lebensraum, and the glorifier of the myth of Nordic superiority, and is one of the oldest and most energetic Nazi proponents of anti-Semitism, he contributed materially to the unification of the German people behind the swastika. He provided the impetus and the inspiration for the movement. His doctrines, we submit, were responsible for the sublimation of morality and the crystallization of the Nordic dream in the minds of the German people, thereby making them useful tools in the hands of the conspirators and willing collaborators in the prosecution of their criminal plan. I now pass to the second phase of Rosenberg's criminal activities, his active contribution toward the preparation for aggressive war through the international activities of the APA, the Foreign Policy Office of the party. As previously indicated in my quotation from the Führer lexicon, which was USA Exhibit 593, Rosenberg became a Reichsleiter, the highest level of rank in the leadership corps, and was made chief of the Foreign Political Office of the party in April 1933. The organization manual of the party, which is document 2319 PS and is offered as USA Exhibit 602, describes the functions of the APA as including the influencing of public opinion abroad so as to convince foreign nations that Germany desired peace. The far-flung activities of the APA are indicated at page 14 of the translation of this document. States as follows.
Has it got a PS number?
2319, sir. The APA is divided into three main offices. A, Office for Foreign Referats, with main offices England and Far East, Near East, Southeast, North, Old Orient, controls personal questions, etc. B, Office of the German Academic Exchange Service. And C, Office of Foreign Commerce. Moreover, there is in the APA a main office for the press service as well as an educational office. The press activities of the APA were designed to influence world opinion in such a manner as to conceal the conspirators' true purposes and thus facilitate the preparation for the waging of aggressive war.
The activities of this office were carried on an ambitious scale. I offer into evidence document 003 PS, which is entitled, quote, a short report on the activities of the APA of the NSDAP. I offer it as USA Exhibit 603. The last paragraph on page 5 of the translation describes the press activities as follows. The press division of the APA is comprised of persons who together master all the languages that are in use. Daily, they examine approximately 300 newspapers and deliver to the Führer, the Deputy Führer, and all other interested offices the condensations of the important trends of the entire world press. The press division, furthermore, conducts an exact archives on the attitudes of the most important papers of the world. Many embarrassments during conferences in Germany could have been avoided had one consulted these archives. Further, the press division was able to arrange a host of interviews as well as conducting a great number of friendly foreign journalists to the various official representatives of Germany. First, then personally asked me to often write about the position of German foreign policy in his papers. This year, 5 continuous articles under my name have appeared in Hearst papers all over the world. Since these articles, as Hearst personally informed me, presented well-founded arguments, he begged me to write further articles for his papers. Thus Rosenberg used his foreign policy office to influence world opinion on behalf of National Socialism. It is interesting to note in passing that Rosenberg states at page 4 of this document that the Romanian anti-Semitic leader, Cuza, followed his suggestions as, in Rosenberg's words, he had recognized in me an unyielding anti-Semite. We will hear more of this affair shortly. The nature and extent of the activities of the APA are amply disclosed in a single document. This is the principal document to which I will refer in this phase of the case against Rosenberg. The document bears our number 007 PS and is entitled Report on the Activities of the Foreign Affairs Bureau of the Party from 1933 to 1943. It is signed by Rosenberg. Portions of Annex 1 attached to the report have already been read into evidence as British Exhibit GB 84. The body of the report and Annex 2 have not yet been referred to. As will be seen, the document contains a recital of widespread activities in foreign countries,
These activities range from the promotion of economic penetration to the fomentation of anti-Semitism, from cultural and political infiltration to the instigation of treason. Activities were carried on throughout the world and extended to such widely separated points as the Middle East and Brazil. Much of the APA's achievements were brought about through the subtle exploitation of personal relationships. Reading from the middle of the first paragraph on page 2 of the translation, which refers to activities in Hungary, we learn that, quote, the first foreign state visit after the seizure of power took place through the mediation of the Foreign Affairs Bureau. Julius Gambus, who in former years had himself pursued anti-Semitic and racial tendencies, had reached the Hungarian premier's chair. The Bureau maintained a personal connection with him. End of quote. The APA endeavored to strengthen the war economy by shifting the source of food imports to the Balkans, as stated in paragraph 3 on page 2 of the translation. I quote, motivated by reasons of war economy, the Bureau advocated the transfer of raw material purchases from overseas to the areas accessible by overland traffic routes. Then he goes on to point out that they had successfully shifted the source of food imports, particularly fruit and vegetable imports, to the Balkans as a result of the Bureau's activities. Activities in Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg were confined, according to the report, to observation of existing conditions, a phrase which may have broad connotations, and to the establishment of relations, especially of a commercial nature. In Iran, the APA achieved a high degree of economic penetration, in addition to promoting cultural relations. I quote from the middle of the third paragraph on page 3. The Bureau's initiative in developing, with the help of commercial circles, entirely new methods for the economic penetration of Iran found expression in an extraordinarily favorable way in reciprocal trade relations. Naturally, in Germany, too, this initiative at first encountered a completely negative attitude and resistance on the part of the competent state authorities, an attitude that had first to be overcome. In the course of a few years, the volume of trade with Iran was multiplied fivefold, and in 1939, Iran's trade turnover with Germany had attained first place. In the last sentence on page 3 of the translation...
Well, now, Mr. Brudno, will you kindly explain to the tribunal how the paragraph that you just read bears upon the guilt of Rosenberg on this trial?
If Your Honor please, we submit that the defendant conspirators used as one of the tools of the conspiracy the economic penetration of those countries which it deemed strategically necessary to have within the Axis orbit. The activities of Rosenberg in the field of foreign trade contributed materially, we submit, to the advancement of the conspiracy as charged in the indictment.
Are you suggesting that it's a crime to try and stimulate with foreign trade in foreign countries?
If Your Honor please, the expression of ideological opinions or the advancement of foreign trade do not in themselves constitute a crime. We agree.
There's nothing here about ideological considerations. It's simply a question of trade.
Further on, Your Honor, he mentions the cultural activities which were
Well, I was
conducted in
confining
Iran.
myself in order to try and get on to the particular paragraph which you just cited.
I see, Your Honor. Well, we're merely trying to show, sir, that the Germans used the foreign trade weapon as a material part of their conspiratorial program.
As I've said before, it's not possible for me or for any member of this tribunal to conduct the case for the prosecution for them. We can only tell them when we think they're being irrelevant and cumulative, and ask them to try and cut down their presentation. It's for you to cut it down.
Rosenberg goes on to state, Your Honor, please, at page 3 of the translation, that Afghanistan's neutral position today is largely due to the Bureau's activity. In connection with Arabia, he says, the Arab question, too, became part of the work of the Bureau. In spite of England's tutelage of Iraq, the Bureau established a series of connections to a number of leading personalities of the Arab world, smoothing the way for strong bonds to Germany. In this connection, the growing influence of the Reich in Iran and Afghanistan did not fail to have repercussions in Arabia. Rosenberg concludes his report with a statement that at the outbreak of the war, he was entitled to consider his task as terminated. And then he says, the exploitation of the many personal connections in many lands can be resumed under a different guise. I now turn to Annex 2 of the report, which is found at page 9 of the translation. This annex deals with activities in Romania. Here, the APA's intrigue was more insidious. Its interference in the internal affairs of a foreign nation were more pronounced. After describing the failure of what Rosenberg terms a basically sound anti-Semitic tendency due to dynastic squabbles and party fights, Rosenberg describes the APA's influence in the unification of conflicting elements. I quote beginning in the 9th line of the translation. What was lacking was the guiding leadership of a political personality. After manifold groping trials, the Bureau believed to have found such a personality, the former minister and poet, Octavian Goga. It was not difficult to convince this poet, pervaded by instinctive inspiration, that a greater Romania, though it had to be created in opposition to Vienna, could be maintained only together with Berlin. Nor was it difficult to create in him the desire to link the fate of Romania with the future of the National Socialist German Reich in good time. By bringing continual influence to bear, the Bureau succeeded in inducing Octavian Goga, as well as Professor Kuza, to amalgamate the parties under their leadership on an anti-Semitic basis. Thus, they could carry on with united strength the struggle for Romania's renaissance internally and her Anschluss with Germany externally. Through the Bureau's initiative, both parties, which had heretofore been known by distinct names, were merged as the National Christian Party under Goga's leadership. Rosenberg's man, Goga, he goes on to explain, was supported by two splinter parties, which had not joined the anti-Semitic trend. And Rosenberg states that through intermediaries, the Bureau maintained constant contact with both tendencies. Goga, the man supported by Rosenberg, was appointed prime minister by the king in December 1937. The pernicious influence of Rosenberg's ideology had achieved a major triumph, for he states, thus a second government
on racial and anti-Semitic foundations had appeared in Europe, in a country in which such an event had been considered completely impossible. I will not deal at any length with the details of the political turmoil which plagued Romania during the ensuing period.
Mr. Brudno, I think the tribunal are satisfied that satisfied subject to what Rosenberg himself or his counsel may say, that Rosenberg tried to spread his ideology abroad. And we don't require any further detailed proof of that. And we are also satisfied that we've heard enough of the activities of the APA.
Certainly, Your Honor. We feel that if the tribunal is satisfied, we can pass on.
Subject,
although
as I
I would
said,
like to point out,
subject,
sir,
as I said, to anything that Rosenberg may prove.
Surely. I'd merely like to conclude with a statement that the activities of the APA were, as indicated in this document 007, primarily responsible for Romania's joining the Axis, which was a vital link in Germany's chain of military strategy. And I would further like to call to Your Honor's attention the evidence which has already been submitted on the activities of the APA in Norway, activities which led to the treason of Quisling and Hagelin, for which they have been condemned. I come now to the final phase of the case against the defendant Rosenberg. We have seen how he aided the Nazi rise to power and directed the psychological preparation of the German people for the waging of aggressive war. I will now offer proof of his responsibility for the planning and execution of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the vast areas of the occupied East, which he administered for over 3 years. These areas included the Baltic states, White Ruthenia, the Ukraine, and the eastern portion of Poland. I will not endeavor here to chronicle again the tale of mass murder, spoliation, and brutality. We feel that that has already been sufficiently evidenced, and further evidence on this point will be presented by the prosecution for the USSR and for the Republic of France. We anticipate, however, that Rosenberg will contend that some of these crimes were committed against his wishes. And indeed, there is some evidence that he protested on occasion, not out of humanitarian reasons, but on grounds of political expediency. We also anticipate that Rosenberg will attempt to place the blame for these crimes on other agencies and on other defendants. The evidence will prove, however, that he himself formulated the harsh policies in the execution of which the crimes were committed, that the crimes were committed for the most part by persons and agencies within his jurisdiction and control, that any other agencies which participated in the commissions of these crimes were invited by Rosenberg to cooperate in the administration of the East, although the brutal methods customarily employed by them were common knowledge. And finally, his ministry lent full cooperation to their activities despite the criminal methods they were employing. Rosenberg was actively participating in the affairs of the East as early as April 20th, 1941, 2 months prior to the German attack upon the Soviet Union. On that date, he was designated by Hitler as Commissioner for the Central Control of Questions connected with the East European region. the Hitler order by virtue of which he received this appointment has been read into the record in its entirety as USA Exhibit 143, our document number 865 PS. The initial preparations undertaken by Rosenberg for fulfillment of his task indicate the extent to which he cooperated in promoting the military plans for aggression. They also show that he understood his task at the inception as requiring the assistance of a multitude of Reich agencies, and that he invited their cooperation. Shortly after his appointment by Hitler, Rosenberg conducted a series of conferences with representatives of various Reich agencies, conferences which are summarized in document 1039 PS, previously offered as USA Exhibit 146. This document indicated the cooperation of the following agencies. It indicated that the cooperation of these agencies was both contemplated and solicited by Rosenberg. The agencies are as follows: the OKW, the OKH, the OKM, the Ministry of Economy, the Commissioner for the 4-Year Plan, the Ministry of the Interior, the Reich Youth Leadership, the German Labor Front, the Ministry of Labor, the SS, the SA, and several others. These arrangements, it should be noted, were made by Rosenberg in his capacity as Commissioner on Eastern questions before the attack on the Soviet Union, before he was appointed as Reich's Minister for the occupied East, in fact, before there was any occupied East for Germany to administer. I would like to refer briefly to some of Rosenberg's basic attitudes regarding his new task and the directives which he knew he would be expected to follow. Your honors will recall that on April 29, 1941, in document 1024 PS, previously introduced as USA Exhibit 278, Rosenberg stated that a general treatment is required for the Jewish problem, for which a temporary solution will have to be determined: forced labor for the Jews, creation of ghettos, etc. On May 8, 1941, he prepared instructions for all Reich commissars in the occupied Eastern territories. These instructions are found in document 1030 PS, previously introduced as USA Exhibit 144. The last paragraph, which has not been called to your honor's attention, reads as follows, and I quote: "From the point of view of cultural policy, the German Reich is in a position to promote and direct national culture and science in many fields. It will be necessary that in some territories an uprooting and resettlement of various racial stocks will have to be effected. In document 1029 PS, which has been introduced as USA Exhibit 145, Rosenberg directs that the Ostland be transformed into a part of the greater German Reich by Germanizing racially possible elements, colonizing Germanic races, and banishing undesirable elements." And in a speech which Rosenberg made on June 20th, 1941, your honors will recall he stated, "The job of Germans, the job of feeding Germans, was the top of Germany's claims on the East. But there was no obligation to feed the Russian peoples, that this was a harsh necessity bare of any feeling, that a very extensive evacuation would be necessary, and that the future will hold many hard years in store for the Russians. This speech, Your Honor, is in the record as document 1058 PS, USA Exhibit 147. On July 4th, 1941, still prior to Rosenberg's appointment as Reich Minister for the occupied East, a representative of Rosenberg's bureau attended a conference on the subject of utilization of labor, and especially of the labor of Soviet prisoners of war. Document 1199 PS is a memorandum of this conference, and I offer it into evidence as USA Exhibit 604. It states that the participants were, among others, representatives of the Commissioner for the Four-Year Plan, of the Reich Labor Ministry, the Reich Food Ministry, and of the Rosenberg Bureau. The first sentence states, and I quote, "After an introduction by Lieutenant Colonel explained that actually there was in effect a prohibition by the Fuhrer against bringing Russian PWs into the Reich for mobilization of labor, on this prohibition being relaxed a little." The last paragraph records that, I quote, "The chairman summarized the results of the discussion as indicating that all the interested bureaus unqualifiedly advocated and supported the demand for utilization of PWs because of manpower needs in the Reich." On July 16, 1941, the day before Rosenberg's appointment as Minister of the Occupied East, he attended a conference at the Fuhrer's headquarters, the minutes of which have been introduced as document L221, USA Exhibit 317. At that time, Hitler stated that the Crimea has to be evacuated by all foreigners and to be settled by Germans alone. He further stated that Germany's objectives in the East were threefold. First, to dominate it. Second, to administer it. Third, to exploit it. Thus, the character of the administration which was contemplated for the occupied East was well established before Rosenberg took office as minister. He knew of these plans and was in accord with them. Persecution of the Jews, forced labor of prisoners of war, Germanization, exploitation were all basic points of policy which Rosenberg knew of at the time he assumed office. On July 17, 1941, Rosenberg was appointed Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. The decree by which he was appointed is in evidence as document 1997 PS, USA Exhibit 319. I would like now to examine the organizational structure and the chain of responsibility which existed within the Ministry for the Occupied East. The organizational structure of the East was such, as we will show, that Rosenberg was not merely a straw man. He was the supreme authority with full control. Document 1056 PS is a mimeographed treatise entitled The Organization of the Administration of the Occupied Eastern Territories. It is undated and unsigned, but we can obtain further information regarding it by reference to document EC 347, which is Goering's green folder, already introduced in evidence as USA Exhibit 320. It is noted that Part 2, subsection A of document EC 347
is entitled, and I quote, "Excerpts from the Directives of the Reichsminister for the Occupied Eastern Territories for the Civilian Administration," and then in parentheses, Brown folder, Part 1, pages 25 to 30. The two paragraphs which follow are identical to two paragraphs found at the top of page 9 of the translation of document 1056 PS. Thus, document 1056 is identified as being a mimeograph of Part 1 of the brown folder, which was mentioned in the green folder and was issued by the Reichsminister for the Occupied Eastern Territories. I now offer document 1056 PS as USA Exhibit 605. I offer this document for the purpose of proving from the directives issued by the Rosenberg Ministry itself the extent of Rosenberg's authority, that he was the supreme civilian authority in the Eastern Territories. The document will show that there was a continuous chain of command from Rosenberg down to the regional administrative officials. A chain of command which extended even to the local prison warden. The document will also show the relationship which existed between the Rosenberg Ministry and other German agencies, a relationship which varied from full control by Rosenberg to close cooperation with them made mandatory by his directives and by Hitler's orders. Finally, the document will show that the various subdivisions of the ministry were required to submit periodic reports of the situation within their jurisdiction, so that the numerous reports of unspeakable brutality which Rosenberg received and which are already in the record were submitted to him pursuant to his orders. The first paragraph of this significant document states as follows: the newly occupied Eastern Territories are subordinated to the Reichsminister for the Occupied Eastern Territories. By directions of the Führer, he establishes a civil administration there upon withdrawal of the military administration. He heads and supervises the entire administration of this area and represents the sovereignty of the Reich in the occupied Eastern Territories. At the top of page 2 of the translation, it is stated, and I quote, "To the Reich Ministry is assigned a deputy of the Reich, of the Reichsleader SS, and chief of the German police in the Reich Ministry of the Interior." End of quote. Roman numeral 3 on page 2 of the translation defines the responsibility of the Reich commissars. And I quote, "In the Reich commissariats, Reich commissars are responsible for the entire civil administration under the supreme authority of the Reich Ministry for the Occupied Eastern Territories. According to the instructions of the Reich Minister for the Occupied Eastern Territories, the Reich Commissar, as a functionary of the Reich, heads and supervises within his precincts the entire civil administration. Within the scope of these instructions, he acts on his own responsibility." And then the chain of command is outlined: subordinate offices, general commissariats, main commissariats, district commissariats, etc. In the second last paragraph on page 3 of the translation, it is stated again: "The higher SS and police leader is directly subordinated
to the Reichskommissar. However, the Chief of Staff has a general right to secure information from him also. Great stress is to be placed on close cooperation between him, the Chief of Staff, and the other main department heads of the Office of the Reichskommissar, particularly with the one for policies.
I'm told that the French translation isn't coming through. Is that right? We'll go on now.
To digress from this document a moment, I ask that the court take judicial notice of the decree signed by Rosenberg, dated July 17, 1941, and found in the Verordnungsblatt of the Reichsminister for the Occupied East, 1942, number 2, pages 7 and 8. This decree provides for the creation of summary courts for decisions on crimes committed by non-Germans in the East. The courts are to be presided over by a police officer or an SS leader who have authority to order the death sentence or confiscation of property, and whose decisions are not subject to appeal. The General Commissar is given the right to reject
Just
a
one
court's
minute.
decision.
Just one minute. Is it coming through to the French now? Very well. Go on.
Thus, the determination of the SS on these summary courts is made subordinate to the authority of a representative of the Rosenberg ministry. At page 4 of the translation of document 1056 PS, At page 4 of the translation of this document, 1056 PS, the position of the General Commissar is defined. Stated here that the General Commissar forms the administrative office of intermediate appeal. 3 paragraphs down it is stated, and I quote, "The SS and police leader assigned to the General Commissar is directly subordinated to him. However, the Chief of Staff has the general right of requiring information from him." The document goes on to describe the function of the various subdivisions of the ministry, including with regional commissars who preside over the local administrative districts. They, too, have police units assigned to them and directly subordinated to them.
Well, Mr. Brudno, surely that could have been stated in a sentence without referring us to all these passages in this document. I mean, Rosenberg was the minister for the Eastern Territories. He had under him Reich commissars and SS units who had the full administration, the civil administration of the Eastern Territories. If you'd stated that, surely that would have been sufficient.
Very well, Your Honor. I'll proceed from that point then to merely point out that the economic exploitation of the territory was undertaken in the fullest cooperation with the Commissioner of the 4-year plan, as shown by paragraph 2 of page 7 of the translation. It is stated there that the economic inspectorates of the Commissioner of the 4-year plan will be substantially absorbed in the agencies of the civil administration after the establishment of the civil administration. I also wish to call Your Honor's attention to the first paragraph of page 6, which reads as follows. The various commissars, it says, are, aside from the military agencies, the only Reich authorities in the occupied Eastern Territories. Other Reich authorities may not be established alongside them. They handle all questions of administration of the area which is subordinate to their sovereignty, and all affairs which concern the organization and activity of the administration, including those of the police in the supervision of the native agencies and organizations and of the population. I now turn briefly to the second section of the document, which is entitled Working Directives for the Civil Administration. The first two paragraphs on page 9 have been read into the record as part of document EC 347, USA Exhibit 320. I call particular attention to the statement that the Hague Rules of Land Warfare, which deal with the administration of a country occupied by a foreign armed power, are not valid. I continue quoting at the last paragraph on page 9. The handling of cases of sabotage is a concern of the senior SS and police leader, of the SS and police leader, or of the police leaders of the lower echelon. Insofar as collective measures against the population appear appropriate, the decision about them rests with a competent commissar. The assessment of fines of money or goods, as well as the ordering of the seizure of hostages and the shooting of inhabitants of the territory in which the acts of sabotage have taken place, can only be by the General Commissar, insofar as the Reich Commissar does not intervene. I conclude with this document by quoting the first sentence at the top of page 13. The District Commissar is responsible for the supervision of all prisons insofar as the Reich Commissar does not intervene. I will not take the time of the tribunal nor burden the record with a detailed account of the manner in which Rosenberg's plenary authority and power were wielded. There is evidence already in the record, and there will be additional evidence presented by the Soviet prosecutor as to the magnitude of the war crimes and the crimes against humanity perpetrated against the peoples of the occupied East. However, merely to illustrate the manner in which Rosenberg participated in the criminal activities conducted within his jurisdiction, I would like to refer briefly to a few examples. I call your attention to the document numbered R135,
which was previously introduced as USA Exhibit 289. In this document, the prison warden of Minsk reported that 516 German and Russian Jews had been killed, and called attention to the fact that valuable gold had been lost due to the failure to knock out the fillings of the victims before they were done away with. These activities took place in the prison at Minsk, a prison which your honors will recall from document 1056 was directly under the supervision of the Ministry for the Occupied East. For my next illustration, I wish to offer document 018 PS. This document has already been introduced as USA Exhibit 186. But the first paragraph is
What
not
was that
yet
last document you referred us to? R135?
R135. I believe you'll find it's the last in the document book, Your Honor.
Oh, yes, I see. Thank you.
I would like to read to the tribunal the first paragraph of document 018 PS, which has not yet been read into the record. The document reveals that Rosenberg wrote Sauckel on 21 November 1942 in the following terms: I thank you very much for your report on the execution of the great task given to you. And I am glad to hear that in carrying out your mission, you have always found the necessary support, even on the part of the civilian authorities in the occupied Eastern Territories. For myself and the officials under my command, this collaboration was and is self-evident, especially since both you and I have, with regard to the solution of the labor problem in the East, represented the same points of view from the beginning. End of quote. As late as July 11th, 1944, the Rosenberg ministry was actively concerned with the continuation of the forced labor program, in spite of the retreat from the East.
Well, Brudno, after making this generality, the Rosenberg goes on to object in the letter to the methods used. You haven't mentioned that.
Quite right, Your Honor. Those objections are already in the record, sir. And I was merely referring to this document to show that Rosenberg favored recruitment from the East, that his civilian administrators cooperated with the recruitment in spite of the methods used, the methods which were known to Rosenberg, as he reports in the letter himself. I now offer document 199 PS. When the tribunal rose yesterday, I'd finished the submission of proof as to Rosenberg's responsibility and authority in the occupied Eastern Territories, and was about to conclude my presentation with 4 brief examples as to the manner in which his authority was exercised. I was in the middle of the third example, which your honors will recall dealt with Rosenberg's participation in the forced labor program. I wish to conclude that illustration with reference to document 199 PS, which we offer as USA Exhibit 606. This document is a letter from Alfred Meyer, Rosenberg's deputy. It is addressed to Sauckel dated July 11th, 1944. This time, Your Honors will note, it is Rosenberg's ministry that is urging action. I wish to quote item number 1 of this letter. It reads as follows.
Just one moment. How do you find it? Well, but it comes in the middle here. You got it? Yeah, no, but it's in order in the situation. Well, yeah, I'll leave the index. Where? Yes, I've got it.
I quote, "The War Employment Command, formerly stationed in Minsk, must continue under all circumstances the calling in of your white Ruthenian and Russian manpower for military employment in the Reich. In addition, the command has the mission to bring young boys of 10 to 14 years of age to the Reich." End of quote. My third illustration deals with Rosenberg's exercise of his legislative powers. And I ask the court to take judicial notice of the decree signed by Losey, who was Reich Commissar for the Ostland. This decree is published in the Verordnungsblatt of the Reichskommissar for the Ostland, 1942, number 38, pages 158 and 159. It provides for the seizure of the entire property of the Jewish population in the Ostland, including the claims of Jews against third parties. The seizure is made retroactive to the day of occupation of the territory by German troops. This sweeping decree was issued and published by Rosenberg's immediate subordinate, and it must be assumed that Rosenberg knew of it and acquiesced in it. I now come to my final illustration. This illustration is derived from document 327 PS, which is already in evidence as USA Exhibit 338. It is a copy of a secret letter from Rosenberg to Bormann, dated October 17, 1944. It furnishes a graphic account of Rosenberg's activities in the economic exploitation of the occupied East. I wish to quote from the first paragraph on page 1, which has not yet been read into the record. I quote, "In order not to delay the liquidation of companies under my supervision, I beg to point out that the companies concerned are not private firms, but business enterprises of the Reich, so that also actions with regard to them, just as with regard to government offices, are reserved to the highest authorities of the Reich. I supervise the following companies." There follows a list of 9 companies: a trading company, an agricultural development company, a supply company, a pharmaceutical company, and 5 banking concerns. On page 3 of the translation, at item 1A, the mission of the trading company is stated to be, and I quote, "Collection of all agricultural products, as well as commercial marketing and transportation thereof, delivery to armed forces and the Reich." End of quote. I now call your attention to item 5 on the same page, which describes the activities of this company as follows. During this period, the ZO
that is the Central Trading Corporation, together with its subsidiaries, has collected grain, 9,200,000 tons, meat and meat products, 622,000 tons, linseed, 950,000 tons, butter, 208,000 tons, sugar, 400,000 tons, fodder, 2,500,000 tons, potatoes, 3,200,000 tons, seeds, 141,000 tons, other agricultural products, 1,200,000 tons, and 1,075,000,000 eggs. The following was required for transportation: 1,418,000 railroad boxcars and 472,000 tons of boat shipping space. End of quote. In conclusion, we submit that the evidence has shown that the defendant Rosenberg played a leading role in the Nazi Party's rise to power by molding German thought so as to promote the conspirators' ambitions, that he played a leading role in spreading propaganda and intrigue and in instigating treason in foreign countries so as to pave the way for the waging of wars of aggression, and that he bears full responsibility for the war crimes and crimes against humanity which were perpetrated in the occupied Eastern Territories and which will be further developed by the prosecutor for the USSR. This completes the presentation of the case against the defendant Rosenberg.